everyone. Thank you so much for coming to my talk. I'm Genadi Samokovarov. This is how I look online. Here is how you can pronounce my name. It's very long. You can just call me Gena, and that's it. It's fine. You can find me on GitHub at Samokovarov, and you can find me on Twitter as well. I'm from Bulgaria, where I run the local Ruby meetup called Ruby Banica. Banica is a pastry made from dough, butter, and cheese, and eggs. It's pretty delicious. I'm also an occasional Ruby on Rails and RuboCop's contributor, and I work for Dext, where we make software for accountants, where we try to empower accountants. I work on a product called Dext Prepare, where we try to automate the most tedious accounting process, which is data entry. And we extract data from financial documents, so the accountants don't need to do it by hand, and they can send this data to the accounting software. We are a product company and a multi-product company now. Besides Prepare, we also have two products in our portfolio called Dext Commerce and Dext Precision. Dext Commerce automates e-commerce, so stuff like Shopify, and Dext Precision does data analysis. So we are a remote-first company, and we are like an OG remote-first company before the pandemic. We have been for a while. And as a remote-first company, we have a lot of documentation. All of our engineering is in Bulgaria. And most of our Bulgarian engineers work remotely from all across Bulgaria. We have lots of documentation, including like processes and style guides, for which I'm going to talk about. And Dext Prepare is written primarily in Ruby on Rails. We have some Python for the data extraction, but our informational system is all done in Rails. And I love that because I have been a Ruby developer for close to 10 years now. But before working at Dext, I worked for a startup that got acquired by Coursera in Bulgaria called Rime.com, and our team was more familiar with Go, so I spent some time in Goland. And the thing that I loved the most in Goland was its development tooling. And every time I write code in Go, I just run it through Go font, through Go format, and whether I like the style or not, that's the style we get, that's the style we commit, and that's that. So we didn't waste that much time on maybe Ruby things we do, like the nitty-gritty style we do at Ruby. And I really love that. I really love that Go font is king. Whatever it says, that's what we do. As a side note, I have a project in Go called Jump. If you are into auto-jump, this is like an auto-jump code with fuzzy matching, which we use for a few years now. I really like it. You can start with Brew or Snap if you're on Linux. So back to Dext. As a remote-first company, we have documented everything, and we have documented our Ruby style guide, which is a bit peculiar for me at first when I saw it. So let me just show you what we do. We do a lot of guarding expressions. Every time we have long lines in assignments, we cut them off on a new line. We omit the parentheses on every method call where we can. Okay, this is important for this talk. That's what I'm going to talk about. We put the dots when we move line chain on the end of the line, which not many of us do. We use a lot of new Ruby features, which I feel not many of us do, and we should, like numbered box arguments and value omission. Value omission without parentheses is particularly tricky. We'll talk about that later. We use endless methods. And maybe one of the few places we put parentheses is method definitions, arguments in method definitions. Some folks in Seattle don't do that, but we do. So this is how our Ruby style looked like. And when I started at Dext, I was like, okay, can't we... When I started working at Dext, because of our culture, we have a tedious code review process, and everybody was like, cut the parents. Which was not used to. And I was like, can't we automate that? Can't we use RuboCop for it? Well, turns out that there was no such RuboCop. So, yeah, we couldn't make RuboCop the king here. So I was thinking, can't we just make this cop? Can't we write a cop, every time we call a method, we check whether if it's parenthesized or not. If it's not parenthesized, then everything is good, and if it is parenthesized, we have an offense. Well, it turns out that it wasn't that easy. There are many cases in which we cannot omit parentheses, or many cases in which omitting the parentheses made the code ambiguous, or even subjectively, there were a few places where we did like to put parentheses. So this talk is all about this method over here. And you may have come for a RuboCop talk, but this is mostly a syntax talk. I'm sorry, but more than a syntax talk, this is like this talk about how we solved a culture problem for us, like this nitty-gritty little code review where we focus on stylistic things, to the code review where we focus more on like how the code works. And at the end of the day, we were able to delegate all the style discussions to RuboCop once we were able to configure RuboCop to our likings. So as a side note, this style over here, from now on, I'm going to refer to it as the Bulgarian style. That's how we write RuboCode. So RuboCop's baddest cop. I'm going to talk about this cop called style method call with parentheses. It is disabled by default. It is disabled by default. It's not enforced. It has two styles. The first one requires parentheses on every method, which we don't do that much in Ruby. But if you want to, you can configure it to do that. And the thing that I added, called omit parentheses, this style, which omits parentheses, which watches for calls where we can omit the parentheses, and we issue offenses about that. We have those options. We can allow parentheses in multi-line calls, because sometimes it's more convenient to have parentheses there. We can allow parentheses in the last method in chaining. Sometimes we do that, for subjective reasons. Sometimes we think it's, we like the symmetry. We can allow parentheses in camel case methods. We'll talk about them later. And we can also allow parentheses in string interpolation. Okay, so the cop was first introduced in RuboCop pull request 6469, and first landed in RuboCop proper in 061.0 on December 5th of 2018. I started working on this cop on November 20, 2018, quite before the pandemic. So those are the people involved with this cop. I did the majority of the work. Božidar Bacov worked on it as well. Andreas Buman from Germany did some code reorganization. Kuichito from Japan did countless bug fixes. So did Daniel Vandersmith, sorry if I mispronounced your name. And there have been other contributions which I probably missed. So the scope of this talk is I want to present to you the parser that RuboCop uses, so we can kind of make sense of how RuboCop sees the code that we give to it and how we can enforce it. I'm going to talk about the evolution of the style method call with args parentheses cop, the omit parentheses style of it. And I'm also going to talk about the style hash syntax cop and enforce shorthand syntax option for it, so we can enforce value omission syntax without parentheses that was introduced in Ruby 3.1. This was quite tricky to do. So let's look at the parser that RuboCop uses. It's made by Whitepark, and the gem is called just parser. So parser is a production-ready Ruby parser. It's written completely in Ruby. And RuboCop uses it since 2013, so for 10 years now. RuboCop relies on this parser. This parser is quite good. It can parse different versions of Ruby, and here's how we can use it. We can require the parser for the current Ruby version. We can feed him some source code textually or in a file, and we can get the AST of this source code with the parse method of parser current Ruby. This is what we required. What I have done here is actually I have used this parser to parse the code that parses Ruby code, and this is what we get. This is a textual representation of the AST. This is human readable thing. That's what I'm going to be showing to you. It has a lot of metadata, so we can work with it programmatically, and we can ask it a lot of things like whether this call had parentheses or didn't. So this is how a typical Ruby program looks like. Every time we have multiple expressions, we have an implicit begin block. So we have this one here. Require is a method, which is invoked without an explicit receiver. That's why we have this send node. New means we have no explicit receiver. This is the method we want to call. And this is the arguments we want to pass to it. This is the string literal parser current. This is this code over here. LV assign, that's how we assigned local variables. So this is a local variable called source, and we have assigned to it the value of this string literal here. And the same for the AST. Here we have constant invocations, and we call the AST, the parse method of the current Ruby constant here. Then we put it, then we show it. And that's how RuboCop's sees your program. That's what we work with. So this is the very first pull request. This is the cases that we cut for it back then. So when can we omit parentheses in Ruby? So every time we have a method call without arguments, we can omit the parentheses. Like I think most of us do that automatically. In Ruby, we have methods that can begin with capital letters. We usually, in the standard library, we use them as constant complementary methods. So, for example, the kernel array method is a method that converts objects to arrays, but we can define them however we like outside of the standard library. And as you can see, when we parse this code, array is a method call. It's not like a constant call. Here we can omit the parentheses too. If we have a method with arguments, say keyword arguments, we can omit the parentheses. If we have a multi-line method, we can omit the parentheses. If we have a method call with arguments on multiple lines, we can omit the parentheses with a few caveats. We can either put a backslash or put the parentheses here. That's why we have this option for the subjective parentheses. Sometimes it's easier to leave them on, but if we want to omit them, we can, like this. We can omit the parentheses in supercalls. This is perfectly legal. We can omit the parentheses in yield calls as well. When we pass arguments to the blocks, we can omit them. In chaining, we can omit the parentheses on the very last call. We cannot omit the parentheses here. Okay, at least not without syntax gymnastics. And we can omit parentheses in method calls with multi-line blocks too. This is perfectly legal to do. However, there are many cases in which we are required to use parentheses in Ruby. For example, if we have method calls in keyword arguments, if they serve as the value of keyword argument, we cannot omit the parentheses. Otherwise, we cannot parse this code. See, this is invalid Ruby. Every time we have calls in literals, like an array literal or a hash literal, we cannot omit the parentheses. Otherwise, we have a syntax error. And we cannot omit parentheses in this syntax, which we use indexed. This is the implicit call syntax. Every time you have a proc or lambda object, you can use the dot parentheses syntax, which is a syntax shortcut for using the call method, which we do use in indexed. And also, during chaining, if your method happens to be called in a chain, you cannot omit the parentheses. We cannot issue complaints here to remove parentheses. So those are the cases that we caught by the very first pull request, and we use this for a bit in index. But the more and more code that go, the more and more we rolled out this through our code base, the more and more edge cases we found. So this was the first pull request where we fixed issues with the scope, and the issues that we fixed were mostly caused by ambiguity. sometimes we want to, we cannot omit the parentheses because it makes our code ambiguous. And this is one of the cases where we cannot omit the parentheses. Super is one of the very few places in Ruby where the parentheses actually do matter. Not to our preference, but to the code itself. When we call super without parentheses, this means that we will call the super method without any arguments. And if we omit the parentheses, it means that we will call the super method with every parenthesis, with every argument that we have been passed to. So this is one of the few places in Ruby where actually the parentheses do matter. We cannot force our developers to omit the parentheses everywhere. For example, with code in method calls around logical operators, because we don't know whether the developers wanted to do this or this. Furthermore, we cannot omit the parentheses on the right-hand side of the logical operators because this is a syntax error. So we have many cases in which we don't want people to omit their parentheses, or otherwise we can break or produce like ambiguous code. We don't want to. Well, technically we can avoid the parentheses here. This is a Ruby warning and also is ambiguous code. Do we know whether the developer meant this or this? So we stopped issue complaints, stopped issue offenses in this kind of code. We do the same for keyword arguments and for passing blocks around. In the third pull request to RuboCop, we fixed a bit more edge cases. This will be a theme in this talk. So when it is ambiguous to omit parentheses in Ruby, if we have code internally operators, we cannot reliably omit the parentheses here because we don't know. Are you sure this means this? Or this? So we decided to allow this case as well. Do you remember the constant-like method calls, the method names with capital letters? Well, if we omit the parentheses here, we will be calling the constant. We won't be calling a method. We will be calling the constant. So if we have such methods, we cannot omit their parentheses. That's how we get the constant-like method. This is how we invoke the constant-like method. So in yet another pull request, we decided to introduce a setting to our cop, because sometimes it's just subjectively we didn't like omitting parentheses where we could. So this is where we introduced the option called allow parentheses in chaining, because of this case over here. Like technically, we are in a chain here. Logger is a method. And our RuboCop remove this method here, remove the parentheses of this method here. However, sometimes when we chain, we did like to put the parentheses in here. This is our subjective taste, so we were able to configure RuboCop to this. So we decided to configure it. In the next pull request, we decided to allow parentheses in the control flow conditions. Our cop would issue warnings for code like this, and we would like to, to omit them. So as you can see, now we're starting to get into this way too subjective kind of territory. Thankfully, this pull request was rejected, and we did reconsider our idea. So now that we have this code, it was running to more and more and more code. We got our first, the legitimate edge case. We didn't handle safe navigation calls. So every time we had a safe navigation call in like chain, our code would try to tell the users, to tell the developers to omit the parentheses here, which would have been invalid code. So now we handle this as well. Yet another round of fixes followed. So when it is ambiguous to omit parentheses in Ruby, when we pass regexes with a slash literal, this can be ambiguous to Ruby, and need to issue a warning. Because Ruby may think that this is calling the division operator. So we allow the parentheses here. This is how this regex is parsed. By the way, we could have used, CJUs for the regex, and this won't require parentheses. This will be fine. Our cop understands that. So when it is required to use parentheses in Ruby, so sometimes when we go, when we give default argument values with method calls, we have to put the parentheses, otherwise this code won't be valid Ruby code. Okay, this is a syntax error. So we allowed this as well. This happens if we don't put the parentheses here as well. So we still cannot omit the parentheses over here. This is still a syntax error. So we cannot omit the parentheses in single line blocks or blocks with braces, not like do end. Yeah. So why did we hit all those edge cases? How did this development happen? Well, at Next we run RuboCop only with Git changes. At this point of time, this wasn't our biggest problem. And eventually we were able to get the cop into all of our code base and CI, but for the time being, we run it only on code changes, so every time we change the file, that's when we run the cop on it. Which is a good approach, which is a good approach for a big code base. You can read a good Evil Martians article by Vlad called RuboCoping with Legacy on other strategies on how you can configure RuboCop for legacy code. So then come this pull request called RuboCop's 6611. Yet another bunch of various fixes. By this time, we are in January 2019. And by this point, we are just doing bug fixes. Somehow we have missed those branches here. When we have like code with lots of conditionals, we are able to fix that. So this was good. So then we found more edge cases around super. When we passed method calls as arguments to super, our cop wanted us to remove the parentheses, which was a syntax error. So we fixed that. We fixed many. We fixed other syntax errors. In other pull requests, we fixed this error over here. We have forgotten about the range syntax, and we wanted people to omit parentheses here, which is illegal. So now we can do that. Another round of bug fixes came, this time for keyword value arguments. We couldn't omit the parentheses over here because it's a syntax value. It's a syntax error. So this is another case of where it is actually ambiguous to remove the parentheses in Ruby, because we don't know whether we are calling, if we have these unary operators, we don't know whether we are calling foo -1 or foo with -1. So we decided to allow such cases to have parentheses. This is another subjective fix. When you have this, dense syntax over here, forcing people to omit the syntax, the parentheses, started to look a bit funny to us. So we decided to allow the parentheses when we call operator methods, when we explicitly call operator methods. Sometimes we cannot avoid this with like the chain operator. We cannot, with the safety navigation operator, we cannot avoid calling the index method like this. Sometimes we can, but we decide to allow it across the board. So we found another edge case where you couldn't remove the parentheses. This one is in Newt. This is perfectly valid. However, omitting the parentheses here is a syntax error. Interestingly enough, if you just have a single argument, this does work. And it works for every method dispatch, not only on Newt. So this is another change where we did it by heart. This is subjective whether we can omit the parentheses here or not. We decided to allow parentheses in calls in string interpolation because it becomes quite ambiguous, especially if you have many calls without parentheses in a single interpolation. So we decided to allow this. And we added an option for that, which is disabled by default. It's called allow parentheses in string interpolation. So this is another nice edge case. Here we cannot omit the parentheses. Actually, we can. But do you know how this code parses if we do omit the parentheses? Well, this starts an endless range. So with this new syntax of forwarding arguments, we had to allow people to put the parentheses here. In Ruby 2.7, we introduced a new bug. We introduced a new concept in Ruby called numbered arguments. Well, those numbered arguments, those blocks with numbered arguments are parsed differently than regular blocks. Those blocks have the AST type of numblock, while regular blocks have the null type of block. So we had a lot of cops in RuboCop broken for a while because we handled block nodes and not numblock nodes. Our cop was one of them, and RuboCop is doing quite well with numeric arguments now. Not only for this cop, but for many others. Yes, sometimes when we change the language, we change it in such a way that we parse it differently. So RuboCop has to catch up with that. So after this change, we did allow the use of numblocks. So sometimes we use code like this, and we cannot omit the parentheses here in the assignment, in the condition. This is not valid Ruby. So we fix that. So in many literals, as I said before, in literals we cannot omit the parentheses. However, this code had a block, and we have missed this case, so we cannot omit the parentheses here because it's a syntax error. So now blocks and unblocks are handled in literals as well. And our biggest change has to be Ruby 3.1, where we introduced this little feature called value omission. So instead of writing this hash, we can write it like this, like we can in JavaScript. This is enforced by the hash syntax cop and this option over here. Naturally, we wanted to use it. The value omission syntax, however, without parentheses is quite tricky. And it's tricky because this one works, okay? However, this one doesn't. And it doesn't work because every time we leave colon and a new line, RuboCop thinks that the value of this hash is this value, okay? And this is not valid Ruby. We have to put the parentheses here, but even more, we don't. We want to put the parentheses over here. So we don't change the meaning of our code. So we did a lot of iterations on this code to fix this. Quichi opened a RuboCop, a Ruby book about this, and every time we have this syntax, Ruby thinks this is the value. This can be changed in Ruby 3.3. So we'll see. So we found many edge cases around around the value omission syntax. I won't have the time to go through all of them. I think we got the gist of it and handled most of the cases, so you can safely use it without parentheses if you decide to do so. And the copy is smart enough to remove the parentheses here and actually remove the values here and actually put the parentheses at the right place, so you don't change the meaning of your code. And we had like very nice interaction across COPs for this syntax. So I'm running out of time. I will quickly jump over this. Let me just show you this condition before I go. We had a case in our code where RuboCop omitted the syntax and then it blew up with an error saying that there is an empty branch, and we're like, where is this empty branch? Well, thank God that RuboCop crashed, because this was the empty branch over here, and see, none of us saw this, and we're used to code without parentheses. So please use your parentheses. This is all the time I have. Thank you.